I never thought I'd be grateful for being paralyzed. But lying there, completely helpless, watching my wife of 12 years kiss our neighbor through the hospital window, I realized sometimes the worst betrayals come with the clearest view. She thought I was unconscious. She thought I'd never walk again. She was wrong about everything. If you're listening to this story right now, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below about your own experiences with betrayal. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. 3 months earlier, I was driving home from my construction job on a Tuesday evening. Nothing special about that day. Just another ordinary moment before everything changed forever. The drunk driver ran the red light at 60 miles per hour. I remember the sound of glass shattering, the taste of blood, then nothing. When I woke up 2 weeks later, Sarah was sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand. Her eyes were red from crying, and she whispered, "Thank God you're awake." The doctors explained everything with that careful, gentle tone they use when they're about to destroy your life. Spinal injury, paralysis from the waist down, uncertain recovery prospects, months of rehabilitation ahead. Sarah squeezed my hand and said, "We'll get through this together, baby. I'm not going anywhere." Those words. I held onto those words like a lifeline during the darkest weeks that followed. The rehabilitation hospital became my world for the next month. For walls, the smell of disinfectant, and the constant noise of medical equipment. Sarah visited every day initially, then every other day, then twice a week. She always had reasonable excuses. Work was demanding. The insurance paperwork was overwhelming. She needed to handle things at home. I understood, or at least I thought I did. The first sign something was wrong came during week 3. Sarah walked in wearing a new dress, bright yellow, something I'd never seen before. When I complimented it, she blushed and said it was old, just something she'd found in the back of her closet. But I knew every piece of clothing my wife owned. That dress was definitely new. Then there were the phone calls. She'd step out into the hallway to take them, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked who was calling so frequently, she'd say it was her sister or her boss or someone from the insurance company. Always someone else. The physical therapist, Maria, was working with me on upper body strength when I first saw them together. My room was on the 3rd floor, with a clear view of the hospital parking lot. Sarah was standing next to her silver Honda, but she wasn't alone. A man was with her. Tall, dark hair, wearing a blue jacket I recognized. Rick, our neighbor from 2 houses down. They were standing close. Too close. Sarah was laughing at something he'd said, touching his arm in that casual way that isn't casual at all. I watched them for maybe 3 minutes before they separated. Sarah headed toward the hospital entrance. Rick walked to his truck. My heart was racing, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Rick was just helping out. Maybe he'd driven Sarah to the hospital because her car was having problems. Maybe he was offering to help with yard work while I was laid up. Neighbors help neighbors, right? That night, Sarah seemed distracted during her visit. She kept checking her phone, kept glancing toward the door. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she was just tired. Work stress. The usual. Rick stopped by the house yesterday, she mentioned casually while straightening my blanket. He offered to mow the lawn while you're recovering. Such a sweet gesture. Sweet gesture. Those words echoed in my head long after visiting hours ended. The second time I saw them together, there was no mistaking what I was witnessing. Same parking lot, but this time Rick had his arm around Sarah's waist. This time, she was looking up at him with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. This time, when they thought no one was watching, they kissed. Not a friendly peck. Not a comforting embrace between friends. Oralkish. The kind of kiss that says everything about what's really happening. I couldn't move my legs, but I could feel my world crumbling underneath me. That evening, Sarah arrived for her visit 30 minutes late, her lipstick slightly smudged, her hair not quite as perfect as usual. She apologized for being delayed, something about traffic. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the understanding husband, while my mind raced with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. "How's Rick doing?" I asked instead, keeping my voice neutral. "Rick? Oh, fine, I guess. Why do you ask? Just wondering. He's been so helpful with the house. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Yeah, he's a good neighbor. A good neighbor, right? Over the following weeks, the pattern became clearer. Sarah's visits grew shorter and less frequent. She was always checking her phone, always in a hurry to leave. Meanwhile, the hospital staff began treating me differently. Not with pity exactly, but with a kind of careful kindness that made me wonder what they'd witnessed that I hadn't. It was Nurse Jennifer who finally confirmed what I already knew in my heart. She was adjusting my for one evening when she said, quietly, "I'm sorry about what you're going through, and I don't just mean the accident." I looked at her for a long moment. What do you mean? She glanced toward the door, then back at me. The woman who visits you, is that your wife? Yes. And the man she's usually with in the parking lot? My throat felt tight. That's our neighbor, Rick. Jennifer nodded slowly. I see. Well, I just want you to know that some of us here, we've noticed things, and we think you deserve better. That night, lying alone in my hospital bed, I made a decision. I was going to get better, not just physically but strategically. I was going to recover, and when I did, I was going to handle this situation on my own terms. The doctors had said there was a chance I might regain some function in my legs with intensive therapy in time. It was a small chance, maybe 20%, but it was something. I started pushing myself harder in physical therapy. I started doing extra exercises when no one was looking. I started planning. 3 weeks later, I felt it. A tiny sensation in my right toe. Just a flutter, like a distant memory of movement. I didn't tell anyone. Not the doctors, not the nurses, and definitely not Sarah. The sensation grew stronger over the following days. Small movements, barely noticeable, but progress nonetheless. Still, I kept quiet. I had learned the value of information, of knowing something that others didn't know. Sarah's behavior grew more brazen as she assumed my condition was permanent. Her visits became perfunctory, obligation rather than love. She'd sit for 20 minutes, make small talk about the weather or her job, then claim she had errands to run. Meanwhile, I knew exactly what errands she was running and with whom. The breakthrough came 6 weeks later. I was alone in my room, practicing the leg exercises the physical therapist had shown me, when I managed to lift my right leg 3 inches off the bed. The movement was shaky, weak, but it was real. I could walk again, eventually, but I still didn't tell anyone. Instead, I started planning my next move. I began asking Sarah more questions about home, about the neighbors, about how she was managing everything alone. I played the concerned husband, worried about being a burden, grateful for her sacrifice. She ate it up, probably because it made her feel less guilty about what she was doing behind my back. "Rick's been such a help," she told me one afternoon. "I don't know what I would have done without him." "That's wonderful," I replied. "You should invite him for dinner once I'm home. I'd like to thank him properly." The look that crossed her face. Panic mixed with something else. Excitement, maybe? The thought of having both her husband and her lover at the same dinner table clearly appealed to her sense of drama. "That's a great idea," she said. "I'm sure he'd love that." I was discharged from the hospital 8 weeks later. The doctors were amazed by my progress. Partial sensation had returned to both legs, and I could stand for short periods with assistance. They expected continued improvement with outpatient therapy. Sarah was suitably impressed and emotional about my recovery, playing the devoted wife role perfectly. Coming home was surreal. Everything looked the same, but I saw it all differently now. Our bedroom, where Sarah had been sleeping alone while carrying on her affair. Our kitchen, where she'd probably cooked meals for Rick. Our living room, where they'd probably spent time together while I was fighting to regain the use of my legs. But I smiled and expressed gratitude for being home. Gratitude for her support. Gratitude for neighbors like Rick who'd helped us through such a difficult time. The dinner invitation came up again a few days later. This time, I was the one who brought it up. "Honey, we should really have Rick over soon. I want to thank him face to face for everything he's done." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "Of course. I'll ask him when he's available." Rick accepted the invitation readily. Why wouldn't he? He probably thought he was untouchable, that the paralyzed husband would never suspect his devoted wife of betrayal. He had no idea what was coming. The dinner was scheduled for the following Friday. I spent the week making preparations, not just for the meal, but for what would happen afterward. I'd been seeing a lawyer quietly, handling some legal matters that Sarah knew nothing about. I'd also been making some financial arrangements, moving assets, protecting what needed to be protected. On Friday evening, Rick arrived promptly at 7, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing his biggest smile. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye and said, "It's so great to see you doing better, man. We were all so worried." That was interesting. Dinner was pleasant enough. Rick regaled us with stories from around the neighborhood. Sarah laughed at his jokes a little too enthusiastically, and I played the grateful invalid, thankful for their friendship during my darkest hour. Over dessert, I dropped the first hint of what was to come. "You know, this experience has really made me think about what's important in life," I said, looking directly at Rick. "About honesty, loyalty, the bonds we share with the people closest to us." Rick nodded solemnly. "Absolutely. Life's too short for games." "Exactly," I agreed. "Which is why I want to be completely transparent with both of you about something." Sarah and Rick exchanged a quick glance. Just a flicker, but I caught it. "I've decided to sell the house," I announced. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. "Sell the house?" she repeated. "Why would we sell the house?" "Well, with my medical bills and the uncertainty about my long-term earning potential, it makes sense to downsize. I've already spoken with a real estate agent. We could have it on the market within 2 weeks." Rick was very quiet, suddenly very interested in his coffee. "But this is our home," Sarah protested. "We've built our life here." "I know it's a big change," I said gently. "But sometimes big changes are necessary. Sometimes we discover that the life we thought we were building wasn't real to begin with." Another glance between them. This one lasted longer. "What do you mean by that?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled. I smiled and reached across the table to take her hand. "I mean that my accident taught me to see things more clearly, to notice details I might have missed before, to pay attention to what's really happening around me." Rick cleared his throat. "Well, I should probably get going. Thank you for dinner. It was delicious." "Actually, Rick, I'm glad you're here for this conversation," I said, "because it involves you too." Now I had their complete attention. Sarah's hand went rigid in mine. "See, I've been thinking about your generosity during these difficult months. All that time you spent helping Sarah while I was in the hospital. All those visits to check on the house. All those afternoons you spent making sure she wasn't lonely." Rick's face had gone pale. "I was just being neighborly." "Oh, I know exactly what you were being," I replied, my voice still perfectly pleasant. "And I want you to know that your neighborliness won't be forgotten." I turned to Sarah, whose eyes were wide with growing panic. "Sweetheart, I also want you to know how much I appreciate your dedication these past few months. Visiting me in the hospital, taking care of everything at home, managing all the stress of my recovery. It must have been exhausting, having to balance so many different commitments." She tried to pull her hand away, but I held on gently. "The thing is," I continued, "I've come to realize that this house holds too many memories, some beautiful, some complicated. I think we all need a fresh start." "What are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm talking about new beginnings, clean slates, the chance to build something honest." I released her hand and stood up, my legs steady beneath me. Both Sarah and Rick stared as I walked around the table without assistance. "You see, the doctors were wrong about a lot of things. My recovery progressed much faster than they predicted. I've been able to walk normally for 3 weeks now. I just chose not to share that information immediately." The blood drained from Sarah's face. I wanted to make sure I understood the full situation before making any major decisions. "And now I do." Rick pushed back from the table. "Look, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all," I interrupted. I saw you two together in the hospital parking lot. Multiple times. I know about the afternoons you've spent here while I was at therapy appointments. I know about the new clothes, the changed behavior, the late-night phone calls. Sarah started to cry. Not the kind of tears that come from remorse, but the kind that come from being caught. I also know, I continued, that this house is in my name only, purchased before our marriage with money I inherited from my father, which means that when I sell it next week, the proceeds will be mine to do with as I choose. You can't do this, Sarah said through her tears. Actually, I can, and I am. You have 30 days to find alternative living arrangements. Rick, I assume you'll be helpful with that transition, given your investment in the situation. Rick was already moving toward the door. This is crazy, man. You're making a huge mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting the wrong people, I replied. But that's a mistake I won't make again. After they left, and they left quickly together, which was fitting, I sat alone in my living room for the first time in months. Really alone. The house was quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. It's done, I said when he answered. Move forward with everything we discussed. The house sold within 10 days. I moved to a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy but clean and honest. Sarah moved in with Rick temporarily, then disappeared from my life entirely when she realized there would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, no second chances. I heard through mutual friends that their relationship didn't last long once the excitement of their secret affair was gone. Apparently, relationships built on betrayal don't have solid foundations. Who could have predicted that? 6 months later, I was walking 2 miles every morning, working part-time from home, and slowly rebuilding my life on my own terms. The physical therapy continued, but the emotional recovery was complete. I'd learned the difference between being paralyzed by circumstances and being paralyzed by choice. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about how I handled the situation, if I think I was too harsh, too calculating. Here's what I tell them. When someone shows you who they really are in your darkest moment, when they abandon you at your most vulnerable, they're telling you everything you need to know about their character. I simply responded with the same level of honesty they showed me. The truth is, that hospital window gave me more than just a view of their betrayal. It gave me clarity about what I deserved, what I was willing to accept, and what I was strong enough to change. These days, I'm grateful for a lot of things. My recovery, my independence, my newfound ability to recognize genuine people from those who pretend to be genuine. But mostly, I'm grateful that I learned to see clearly while there was still time to act on what I saw. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you ends up being the best thing that ever happened to you. You just have to be strong enough to recognize the difference. If you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about real people surviving impossible situations.